Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education. It's the Monday main event, Monday, April 11th, 2022. Today, we're going to do what we call a round table discussion on rent to own, RTO as it's often called. So for those of you who've never tuned in before, this group is all about education, helping each other out, talking about creative real estate. And by that, we mean things like rent to own and fix and flip and assignments, that kind of thing. We have great guests on to tell us about tax and insurance and finance. We have great focus team leaders who help us put on our focus workshops. The next one coming up May 7th and 8th in Calgary. That is our famous Rapid Cash program, 2 days of incredible education. We feed you and we teach you, and you will go home. Man, you'll go home stuffed with everything you need on starting a creative real estate business. So we're going to call up our focus team now, and I'm going to introduce them, and I'm going to get them to just tell you a little bit about themselves, because I think it's really useful for you to hear who these people are that help us with our focus workshops. And so we're going to ask, as we go around the table, tell us a bit about where and when your real estate journey started, kind of where did it start and what did you do at the beginning of it? And then, a quick summary of your progression through your real estate journey until you get to today. And there are some great stories to be told today. So we want to get started with that. So, we're going to start with, I shouldn't use any like senior junior stuff, should I? No,
you can't help yourself, eh?
Too late. Let's start with Wayne Hillier. Wayne and his wife Gabby. Okay, Wayne, you're on. Tell us about when and where you started and kind of your progression, where you're at today.
For sure. Started just about 10 years ago now. Family business, my wife and I. She's tending to our daughter. I'm the one that goes on the camera. And we started, just like everybody else, buy and hold, trying to figure out how to progress through and buy more properties. Couple joint venture partners kind of hit that wall. And then we ended up finding your courses and started taking Green for Sales, rent owns, Rapid Cash, and just started building our business around that. I mean, I've said it a million times, basically your courses catapulted our business. We were stuck. And we utilized the agreement for sale, the rent to own, all the different seller financing strategies to build the business that we have today. Did a bunch of agreement for sales, did a bunch of rent to owns, did more joint ventures, got into fix and flips, do assignments. Hey, thanks, kiddo. My daughter just brought me a coffee. Isn't that great? Thank you.
That's a nice daughter.
Yeah. And so I have a seller financing business now. It's basically just a full-on creative real estate investor now.
And you and Gabby are doing this full-time now. This is your business, right?
Yep, you betcha.
All right. Okay, well, let's move on to Andrea. Andrea, I love your story. I know your story. I'm never tired of hearing.
Okay, so I've been investing in real estate since 2003. I transitioned from being a police officer to a full-time real estate investor. And I started with long-term buy and holds until I ran out of my own money, then joint ventured with people, then took creative real estate back in, I want to say 2008, 2009, which is where I met the lovely Neil Taniguchi and his wife, Linda. And ever since then, the main focus has been on creative strategies, although over time I've been investing in fourplexes and now developing. So yeah, it's all been good.
And you are actually a registered realtor and a property manager, along with all of your other things that you do. Isn't that right?
Yes, I focus on working with investors. So I have both my residential and commercial licensing in the province of Alberta.
Also full-time. All right. And let's move on to the delightful Neil Taniguchi. And he is the face of the Linda and Neil show, as Wayne is the face of the Wayne and Gabby show. But I think we should switch that up, Neil. I know Linda's got a lot to say and has said a lot. But anyway, you're on. Tell us about you guys.
It's funny. Our timeline's very similar to Andrea's. We got our first rental as a couple in 2002. I mean, she had owned both sides of a duplex prior to that and rented out one side, lived in the other, and I had rented rooms in my house. But as far as the two of us, in 2002, we got our first rental, and we were doing the buy and hold thing. And same thing, you start to realize that for the number of properties that we had in terms of what it was generating in cash flow, it was creating a ton of work. It wasn't necessarily enough to replace an income. And so it was all about futures for us on that. And then when we took the course in 2009, when we met Andrea, same thing, all of a sudden we realized that some of these creative strategies can really, really dial up your monthly cash flow, as well as create some more frequent cash outs and financial wins, so to speak. I mean, you think about a typical buy and hold, minimum of 5-year strategy, but a lot of them are 10 and 15 and even 20 years and keep them forever. And that's a long-term strategy play, whereas these creative strategies that you teach allow people to get some money today. And money today, this is an expression we've used for years, that equity does not put groceries on the table. So we started down that strategy. Linda was a teacher. She went full-time first because as our portfolio had gotten to be too large for us to handle, we started by hiring a part-time person, and we're now up to 2 employees and about 3 contract employees. And our main focus is we have about a half of our portfolio is rent to own and half are still buy and hold. And I quit my job in 2013. Speaking of aging, holy mackerel, that's a long time ago now. And I was a sales manager at Calgary BMW, and I loved that job. It just was such a time suck, is the biggest thing that you recognize in retrospect, and what real estate can do for you in terms of that. We in our, quite frankly, our business right now has hit kind of a critical mass where we're not growing it. We're not actively looking to grow it. But it has afforded us a lifestyle where we're able to be full-time real estate investors and not necessarily put in the full-time work and plus full-time work. I think a lot of real estate investors recognize that they're doing 50, 60 hours a week on just their real estate side of things, let alone their JOBs. So we've maybe hit the exit lane sooner than some of the others in terms of where we want to be. And it seems to be working so far.
You know, that's it is a great story. I love that story. Folks who love the jobs. Linda was a great teacher, an awarded teacher.
Yeah.
Loved doing her job. And Neil, if you've ever listened to him talk, I can't believe they needed anybody else at that BMW dealership besides you to sell every car that came through the door. But it's great to see. Also, Neil and Linda are as well full-time real estate investors, and they're working off their bucket list of places they want to see and ski trips they want to do, which is what a lot of people say they want to do. Which brings us to Neil and Rachel Oliver out of Ontario. Also a really interesting story for 2 pretty high-powered people. So which of you is going to tell us where the 2 of you started and how you developed to where you are today?
Okay, I'll start and you can fill in the blanks.
It's your journey.
Well, kind of. I kind of sparked this whole journey with real estate investing to begin with, but it was Neil who actually helped us curve into the rent-to-own lane and actually stay here. Because unlike Wayne and Andrea and Neil, the other Neil, we kind of are exclusively focused on rent-to-owns. And what really got us here is about back in 2009, my goal was to replace 2 full-time corporate incomes. I wanted to exit the corporate world so that I could spend more time with our family. And that was after I had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I'll tell you, when time seems to be taken away from you is when you really, really want it back. And I was, I loved what I did. I was in the corporate world, and Neil loved what he did in the corporate world. But as Neil said, it just takes up too much damn time to do that work. So I needed to take control back, but I also needed to replace our job incomes, because we had very good salaries. And every time I would talk to people about what they were doing that didn't rely on a job, a lot of rental property type of conversations were coming up. And that, along with, right away, that conjured up, okay, I need to understand how to fix up properties. We need to understand how to landlord them, and worst case, we have to deal with tenants and toilets. And that didn't seem like it was going to free up our time. And on top of that, the cash flow was not great. So then we kind of had to do a little bit of research, and I stumbled upon the rent to own strategy. And the rent to own strategy really allowed us to create at least $900 a month in cash flow per property. And this is back in 2009. So we used our home equity line of credit to get started. And we started with 4 deals, and we haven't looked back since. In 2014, we both started doing this rent to own business full time, as in working together and not killing each other. Fast forward to 2022, we have helped over 600 families get into home ownership through the rent to own path. We have written a book. We noticed that there was a lack of resources on how rent to own works, what the pitfalls were. So we decided, okay, well, at that time we had helped about 50 families, and we had enough information to share. So we decided to put it all into a book and publish this book back in 2014. And have I forgotten anything, dear?
No, actually, you've nailed most of it. So yeah, over 600 families so far, and growing. I mean, we're dealing with anywhere from 80 to 100 calls a week, which is amazing. Obviously, the way the banking system is going and tightening things up, it puts more people at a disadvantage in qualifying. So it opens up a bit more of an avenue for people to look at rent to own. And I think rent to own is becoming a more legitimate option for a lot of people, more than it ever has before.
Well, Neil, before we move on, now there's a lot of folks listen to these webinars, and they only have kind of the smallest idea of what some of the strategies are all about, which is why we encourage them to show up at one of our focus workshops. But why don't you give us the explanation of what rent to own is, and why people want to participate in a rent to own?
Yeah, so basically rent to own is giving people the chance to live in a home while they're building up their ability to qualify for their own mortgage. That's sort of the simplest way that I like to explain it. So there are a couple of factors that people experience that maybe will prevent them from qualifying with a bank. So number one, they don't have great credit. Number two, they might have higher debt than what the banks are looking for right now. And number three, they might not have the down payment that banks are looking for. So the way it is in Ontario, and I know now it's pretty much like this all across Canada, but month over month, it's a 10% increase in the price of the house, right? So today they might be able to afford a home, but next month they might be priced out of the market. So it kind of puts a bit of fear into a lot of people who are looking at home ownership, because again, here in Ontario, rents are ridiculous on top of everything else. So a 1-bedroom in Hamilton, for example, could rent for $2,500 to $3,000 a month. So people are now looking at, or being faced with, the situation that they're going to get stuck renting because they're going to get priced out of the market due to whatever that is that's holding them back. So rent to owns allow them to get in at today's price. It allows us to build out the future value based on, pretty conservative numbers. And I'm pretty sure we'll dive into that a little bit later. But it allows them the time to build up their credit, allows them the time to pay down their debt and build up their down payment while they're building equity. And we are in a situation again here where we're watching people come to the end of their program. And in many cases, they're buying early because they have $150,000 in equity already after a year or 2 years in the program. So they're able to get ahead, which is great. They've improved their situation to qualify for a mortgage. Our investors are, selling it at that future value. So they're recognizing and earning the money that they expected to earn. So it really does become an absolute win-win as long as it's done properly.
And I'm just going to riff on that a little bit. Win-win. And that's the attitude that all of us have. I know you guys all do. Donna and I do. We teach win-win. We always make sure that whoever we're dealing with, it turns out to be a win-win situation. We don't take advantage of people. We don't set up rent to fail programs where we try and get large chunks of option money, deposit money up front, and from someone who will never have a chance to get a mortgage and take their money and move on. I mean, that's been one of the criticisms of rent to own. There were too many shady operators who were doing that. So anybody who's listening, we always play in a central feature of focus workshops and anybody we work with is it's about win-win or we don't do it. All right, so that's a really good explanation of what a rent to own is and why people are looking to get into rent to own. So now what I want to explore a little bit is what rent to own is like where people are. So you guys are in Ontario. We are all in Alberta. Andrea does some work in BC. And so in my mind, rent to own typically breaks down into two market scenarios. You're either in an active positive market where prices are increasing, or you're in a flatter to negative market where things are steady, or they're kind of cycling up and cycling down, but they're not moving forward very much. So and in Alberta, we've been in that flat to negative market for 3, 4, or 5 years. Not sure how long, but it's been quite a while. So let's talk about why rent to own can work in any market. It works better, I think, in some markets than others. But let's talk about the Alberta market. So Wayne, in a flatter market that we've had here in Alberta, how have you employed the rent to own strategy? And are you still going to be doing that in the kind of market we have now?
It's really funny. The last time we talked about it, our market was significantly different. I mean, just in a matter of weeks. It's crazy how quickly we've changed, and there's been a lot of discussions now that our market is changing and we're on the way up, or at least we foresee it to continue this way. Everybody's just kind of adapting and pivoting towards, maybe the rent to own is a really good strategy and we can apply it like other provinces have, like Ontario. But I've historically used it in my business in the last, however many years. I used it as I still found that there was you could still use it in a negative or a flat market because there's still people that are looking to have problems solved, right? As long as there's a problem, rent to own can potentially solve it. So for people who couldn't save up down payments, for people who are new immigrants, for people who needed some time to repair their credit, there's still a place for rent to own. Me personally, I liked pairing it with the agreement for sale strategy. I like to use that as a problem or a solution to a problem for negative cash flow. The extra option credits offset my negative cash flow. There's always problems where rent to own can solve. Can be a solution. Sorry.
Yes, and so what a lot of folks have done in Alberta, including you, Wayne, is acquire properties through the rent to own strategy, where you're acquiring them at a reasonable price, but where there's room to exit your agreement for sale through a rent to own, where you can, in a fair way, increase the price, get solid market rent, and generate some cash flow. So even in a negative market, there have been and continue to be opportunities on the rent to own side. Mm-hmm. Now, Andrea, do you agree with what Wayne has been saying on your use of rent to own over the last few years? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that with the last 12 months being an exception, before that point, we were very careful about rent to own because we had not seen really any increases. So like Wayne said, pairing it with an agreement for sale has been super important because you need to have that discount on the price to make sure there's profit at the end. And then in the last 12 months, now that we're seeing the values starting to rise and stuff in Alberta, we've even started to do some tenant first rent to owns, which we haven't done in a very long time. So yes.
Yes, the tenant first strategy, which is, I think, what Rachel and Neil do, and what works better in a rising positive market. Didn't work out or wasn't working out very well. It was way easier to find a house or a property through an agreement for sale or at some discounted rate, discounted price, and then because you get it at a decent price, you then have room to market it as a rent to own and have more people on the uptake there. So Neil Taniguchi, moving over to you, your portfolio is half long-term buy and hold, I think, and half rent to own. And I know you said that you're I was going to say treading water, but that's kind of a negative way to say things. You're not treading water. You and Linda are doing your business is ticking along nicely. It's churning out cash flow. It's allowing you to live the kind of life you wanted to live, and so you're not pursuing every avenue that shows up. It's a fairer way to say that. So, what with the changing market here in Alberta, what are your thoughts on what you're going to do with rent to own going forward?
That's a great question, Barry. I think for us right now, we are still, I have not, quite frankly, dipped my toe back into doing a tenant first deal. And so for the listeners out there, tenant first is basically, if I'm correct, that's what Rachel and Neil Oliver are doing, where you're qualifying the applicant first on their ability and their future ability, and you're going to then go send them out shopping with a realtor to buy a property. We tried our last one in 2015, just as the market collapsed here, and thought we bought a property about $15,000 under market value even at the time, and we had set a future price. It was $360. We bought it for $348. We set a future value of, I think, about 4.5% a year, and in 3 years, their option to purchase price was right around the $400,000 mark, and the property appraised for $320. So we went, So once bitten, twice shy. To answer your question, I'm a little tentative because, you asked 4 different people who are quote unquote in the industry about what the future of the prices are here in this province, and you'll get 5 opinions as to, is this a blip? Is it sustainable? Is it going to be the new level? Is there around the corner? And my, quite frankly, is I don't know the answer. We've been through however many dips in this province in the past, the cyclical nature of real estate here. I see lots of new money pouring into this province, which is always exciting. I hope that it's sustainable because that's good for all of us in the long run. We're just a little, again, given that we're not aggressive in expansion right now, we're a little bit reluctant to go out there and acquire properties at today's price plus mark them up. I mean, it'd be beautiful if we could, because I've always listened to the ROI that you get in an appreciating market on a rent to own is mind numbing to us. But is it real? I can remember, 15 years ago when we were taught how to do joint venture presentations, and we put in multipliers of 2%, 4%, 6%, 8% per year for 5 years and 10 years. And you look back at some of those JV presentations today and you go, wow, right? Again, they didn't work in Alberta. They probably worked in some of the other markets.
Yes, it having struggled with the flatter market that we've had here in Alberta, it's even as you listen to the experts, it's a little hard to go, okay, well, we're bringing 400,000 people a year into the country. We're already short 100 or 200 or 300,000 housing units now with immigration ramping up. There's all of the predictions say that there's no way that we can quickly produce the number of dwelling units that the country and the number of folks who are moving into Canada will need. We just can't do it, and so that seems to bode well for certainly the rent to own strategy. And that has been the case for Rachel and Neil ever since you started way back when. I mean, have you had any kind of sustained drop, in your Ontario market, or has it been steadily up? Maybe sometimes higher, sometimes a little not quite going as high, but has it been steadily up since you started?
You're the numbers guy, and he's going to probably elaborate on this, but I just want to touch on something pretty important. Kind of when we got started, first of all, Neil is Mr. No. Neil Oliver stands for Mr. No. And he was very skeptical about any form of real estate investing. And rent to own was lumped right in there. So at the time, back in 2009, we really were not certain where the real estate market was going. The appreciation rates were not as astronomical or even close to double digits back then. So when he actually embraced the idea of doing rent to owns, he based it off of super conservative numbers. And high appreciation is really not the only place where you can make a profit with rent to owns. I believe back then you were using 3.5% when we got started.
3.5 to 4.
Can you believe it? 3.5% in Ontario. And we learned very quickly that it's not just about making a profit on the delta between what you buy the house for in year 1 and what you're going to sell it for in year 3. A lot of the profitability also came from the mortgage pay down component, the charging a higher monthly down payment credit so that it cash flows heavier. So yes, we might not have as much appreciation on the back end, but we have higher cash flow benefits at the front end. And this was always a purely cash flow play for us, and that it held true to that. And then on top of that, back in 2009, 2010, and even I think 2011, we were dealing with very much a seller's market. So we were also able to buy properties with already a little bit of built-in equity, which helped with the profitability when appreciation rates were not as luxurious as they are today. So that, I just wanted to get that across, but I'm sure you have some smart stuff to add.
Interesting word, luxurious. Yeah, I don't know that what we're experiencing now is sustainable. I mean, I do agree with you, Barry. I mean, there's no supply here. There's a bit more now than there was even 2 months ago, but we really have been pretty consistent, 3 to 5% all the way through since we started. And we've used, and that's being very conservative, right? There are markets that were 9%, 8%, some years 15%, then other years 9%. We were always seeing pretty consistent positive numbers. We ran numbers very conservatively. Our investors still did very well. Our tenant buyers still had the option to always build in equity at some point in time. We used to have tenant buyers that would do a lot of work on the property. So they would build out a basement, they would change the kitchen, change flooring, and this would increase their equity, built-in equity, sweat equity, right? So that was really, that seemed to be such a great recipe all the way through. And then the last couple of years, it's been like, what the heck just happened, right? 25%, 35%. It actually increased the amount of investors that became available because a lot of people started pulling equity out of their homes and buying more homes. And a lot of them weren't really real estate savvy. So rent to own seemed to be a really great option for them, right? They could make great cash flow. They could make decent returns at the end without having to do any work. Where we've run into issues in Ontario, especially this year, is really the competition. You know, we're going into an offer and there's 57 offers. Right. And we're with a rent to own, especially tenant first, what's really, really key is that in an offer presentation with multiple offers, you cannot go crazy because you still have to match an appraisal with the property, right? And that's sort of the big twist to all of this is that we had to go in based on comps. What's been selling? Okay, 580 is what it's selling for, and it's listed for 350 because that's the big game here. Is we sold for 300,000 over list. Well, list is really being, it's being shortchanged, and realtors are jumping at the chance to say that they're way better than they are because they're really only selling it at market value. But there would be always one, if not many, crazy offers in any of these situations where, we would put in 580 thinking that's what the last house sold for. And then it would sell for 800,000. And we'd be like, what? Like, this is never going to appraise for 800,000. But of course, what happens there is now 800,000 becomes the ballpark that people want to shoot for, not 580 anymore. And that same house is now, all the other houses on the street go up for 650, 700. And I don't know that all the appraisers here in Ontario are matching, with what they're seeing as comparables in the area. But so this is the key, is that you've got to make sure that we're still being very competitive, but at the same point, we're not killing ourselves or shooting ourselves in the foot by overshooting the appraised mark.
So just so folks get a sense of numbers, you've had a very conservative approach right from square one. I think Rachel said you were looking at an appreciation rate of 3.5% or maybe 4% when you started out. So that is, to be clear, 3.5%, 4% increase in the price of the house in 1 year, correct? 1 year.
Correct.
And did you say earlier on that prices are going up 10% per month?
Well, in certain areas, in
Various
the
places?
February, absolutely. We were seeing houses jump $45,000 in a month. One house would sell on this street at $750, and the next month you're buying for $810. And it's just, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just because some crazy person gets the advice to go all in order to secure a property, and that just inflates the rest of the prices that people now put their house up for.
So this is a key point, folks who are listening, is that we believe a conservative approach is better in lots of areas of real estate. So there's no point saying to your rent-to-own tenant buyer that because prices are going up 10% per month, you're going to set the price of their house at 8% per month, and that's the appreciation factor you're building in. Not 3 to 5% per year, but you're going to go not 10, but 8% per month. And isn't that lovely?
So to be honest with you, Barry, we're still at 5% per year.
5% per year, yes.
And you know what? It still returns beautifully for investors. In fact, there are many situations where, like you said earlier, people don't believe. I think Neil actually mentioned the numbers are just unbelievable. And they're still unbelievable, even at a conservative rate of 5%, as an example. I don't appreciate the homes any more than 5%, even though they're going up 20%. And I know Deb's asking a question about how our partners might feel about this interest, or the appreciation rate. But I mean, the reality is they're still making very good returns.
So let's talk about that part a little bit. Let's pick a $500,000 or $600,000. Pick one that you've done lots of, so that you can say, for this price of a house, so that on a 5% appreciation, and we've done 100 of these. These are how the numbers work. I want people to hear how these numbers work and why you can take a conservative approach and do extremely well.
Yeah. So what we're doing a lot more of these days is 700,000 to 900,000, because the 5 and 6s are very hard to secure with, multiple people looking. Yeah, they're all looking at that price point. That's become entry level. Yeah. And that to me is really, really scary. Entry level is 600,000. That was a luxury home 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, at 800,000, at 4.5% to 5%, you're cash flowing anywhere from 900. And again, it's all dependent on the down payment, right? Sure. If our tenant buyers are coming in with 4 or 5%, we call them tenant buyers because they are tenants and they become buyers as they exit into the program or exit the program. They're coming in with 4 or 5%. So right off the bat, the investor's not coming in with 20, they're coming in with 15, right? Because they're getting 5%. So leverage right off the bat will help with a little bit of the returns. So they don't have to invest as much to make as much. And then you're cash flowing anywhere from 900 to 1,700, again, depending on the cash that's come in from the down payment. We recently did a deal where the cash flow was over 2,500 a month, which is remarkable, but it was because we took on a smaller down payment. So a bit more risk from an investment standpoint, but less risk when you look at the fact that these people made over 300,000 a year. So income was there. They're newly immigrated to the country. They're working on their PR. So they should be in a great position within a 2-year window to qualify for this, because they were putting money away as they go through now being secured in their employment. But so the cash flow is remarkable. Right now, you have to give some of this back because it is a down payment credit, and we have to credit that back. That's really the key to all of this. for the tenant buyer. That's how they build up their down payment. But yeah, you're looking at, doubling your money in an investment like this in a 2 to 4 year window, right? Which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So you can complain about the fact that you're leaving money on the table, but we like to look at it as it's a karma play as well. You're helping a family, they're getting ahead. It's going to, this is always going to come back to you later. The next deal you do will also be a successful, great deal that you're going to double your money. And we do have investors that, they've done 17, 18, 19 of these. They just keep cycling every 3 years. They're cycling them back and they want more rent to owns. And basically they're cash plays, right? They like their cash flow. So
it's a rapid cash strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You build your cash up quicker within 3-4 years. You don't have the tenants and toilets hassles, which frees you up tremendously, and you have really managed risk. And all of this is anchored in the fact that you're helping another family achieve home ownership. So there's a lot of benefits to leaving some money on the table, yet still have lucrative cash flow and double your money annually without doing anything. And our partners are inactive; they're passive. So this is a passive play.
I've still yet to see, like, honestly, from a strategy perspective, and again, I am Mr. No. I'm trying to turn that into KNOW rather than NO. But I really do believe, and we've done like everyone else. We go to different courses, we take different, we go to meetups and so on, and we're looking at all the different strategies because it is nice to diversify, absolutely. But I have yet to find a strategy that returns and cash flows the way a rent to own does. So it's really hard to convince me to move my money somewhere else because, yeah, I understand the generational wealth or the long-term wealth of a buy and hold. I get it. I get multifamily. There's a lot of work involved in all of these as well, right?
And time.
Yeah, and time. And rent to owns for us has always been one of those things where you put the right people into the right house, a house that they choose, which is why we do tenant first. They're emotionally connected. They're financially connected. They look after the property. I can't think of a situation where in the last 600 tenant buyers, we've had a problem where somebody's had to put money into the property. So, it's
You mean an investor did.
an investor had to come back in. And, this is not a perfect strategy by any stretch of the imagination. People get divorced. People get separated. They choose not to proceed in the rent to own. And even in those situations here in Ontario, you still end up making really good returns as an investor.
So yes. So for all you folks who are listening, I'm pretty sure you understand, but I'll just say it anyway. In Neil and Rachel's business, they have a pool of investors who will, when a proper tenant buyer is found, the investor will show up with enough money to buy the property, qualify for the mortgage. Sometimes there's a combination of somebody who qualifies and somebody paying, but it isn't Neil and Rachel who are putting up the money. Their job is to find these properties, to put together the deal, to make it really easily understandable so that any investor can see that over their, say, 2 to 4 year investment, they are going to, what did you say, Neil? Double their money?
Yeah, they double their initial investment. Absolutely.
They double their initial investment while they're in this rent to own. So doubling means 100% gain over X number of years. So maybe they're doing 25 or 30 or 40% per year. Folks, you only have to do that once with an investor and pay them. And you might have said to them that you're going to give them a smaller return because it's actually hard for people to believe that they're going to make that kind of a return. But you only have to do it once. And when you come back to them the next time to say, all right, we have another opportunity. Would you like to participate again? How much trouble is it, Neil and Rachel, to have people sign up to do their second one after they've had a successful first one?
Well, it's no trouble at all, Barry. You're absolutely right. It's a too good to be true kind of initial conversation, but once you show them and they experience it, they come back, rinse and repeat, and we have a very healthy waiting list for deals.
All right. Well, let's move back to Alberta then. And so, Neil, you're taking kind of a wait and see attitude because, you're lucky enough to not have to make a bunch of sudden moves. what's it going to take for you to to pursue a positive market rent to own strategy?
I think for us, it's to see that we're already in April now, and the market really went crazy 60 and even 90 days ago, to see that these 30% gains that we haven't seen in decades here are sustainable, right? Is it a new level that is then going to have some moderate growth? Because again, when it's a crazy, let's bid 75,000 over to get this property market, as sellers, we love it. As buyers, we're like, what does that really mean? How do we appraise? I actually want to phone one of our appraisers and pick their brain right now as to how they're even putting a value on a house. So I think it's just to let a lot of your listeners, again, are very familiar with this, kind of modest, humble guy by the name of Don Campbell, who said, leave the first 10% of the market on the table for everyone else. And once you see that gain is not just a blip, but it's a trend, then you can go in and see what's happening. And so right now we're definitely keeping an eye on it. We're watching it. We're having conversations with it. Every time we've had, unfortunately, we don't have 100% success ratio like the Olivers alluded to. Life happens for tenants. There's separations, there's job losses, there's all of those factors that go in there. So we get a property back, and we right now are trying to make the decision: do we put it back into the program, or do we take the big cash out paycheck because of when we bought it that's already in there? And depending on the property, we've peeled a few of them off that way, but we have like a townhouse right now that's up. It's probably up 100,000 since we purchased it in 2019, and it was only a 220 or 230 purchase at the time. What do you do with that one? So that one, we're kind of on the fence, and we're just waiting. If we can get the right person, we will definitely throw that one back into rent to own, because you're looking, you can get, as Rachel said, another year or two of mortgage pay down. That's good money in the bank.
All right. And Wayne, what about you? Are you going to ratchet up your rent to own strategy? I know you and Gabby have lots of things going on, so that may not be what you're looking at right now, but what have you thought about rent to own now that the market's coming back?
I think it's huge. I think it might be a big opportunity. Like Neil said, it's so hard to tell. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see before we start cranking up 5% appreciation rates on our rent to own deals. But I've been having a lot of conversations with coaching clients and saying there is a possibility that it is coming, and keep your eye on it. I'll still use it as I normally have, as a solution to my own business. You know what I mean? To my own properties.
Sure.
But just like everything else right now, like even flipping and rental property, like you kind of have to wait a little bit. It looks really good, but I want to wait, like the Don Campbell example or saying that you said. Let's let everybody else play around with it first, and then I'll make a decision whether I want to start up a website and add a rent to own branch to my business as well.
And Andrea, you're in a slightly different position because you're a licensed residential and commercial realtor, and so you have your own real estate business, which reminds me of an octopus. There's tentacles everywhere, Andrea. You've got stuff going on. You got lots of stuff going on. So, what are you hearing from your client base on the rent to own side of things, as opposed to what you're thinking yourself?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And actually, I received an email from an investor today with a client specifically looking in the Central Alberta area for a rent to own. So I think, there are people out there wanting to get into the market. The cost of goods is rising. Central Alberta, our pricing hasn't risen quite like Calgary, Airdrie, or Edmonton yet, but it'll come because we're usually a little bit delayed. And so it's interesting, because we have such a gap between the used market and brand new housing, that gap has to get closer to each other. And so I think that there could be a really good opportunity to start doing rent to owns now. We did a couple last year, maybe 3 or 4 last year as part of agreements for sale on the purchase side, and we did one tenant first on but we focus, I think, as we see inflation rise, we also have the rising interest rates. So, it's all a bit of a balancing act. And at the end of the day, the money doesn't lie. The numbers don't lie. So I think it's still really important to do your numbers because if your payments aren't high enough, or the rents, if you're not charging enough, you got to make sure all the math is going to work. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 months with housing prices and inflation. So
Yeah, Central Alberta, trails Calgary and Edmonton. Edmonton trails Calgary. It seems to me Calgary kind of leads the Alberta pack in terms of going up and going down. And then Edmonton kind of follows along, and maybe Central Alberta trails after Edmonton. But my niece was looking to, she's got a brand new job. She's getting paid a lot more money. She found a house in Southwest Edmonton for $585,000. Beautiful house. She really loved it. And so they decided they'd put in an offer, which she and her husband did. There were 12 offers at this house that was listed for $850, I think. And I think it sold for $668. So we haven't seen multiple offers over list for a while, but that certainly is the way it's been in Calgary and in Edmonton. Calgary first and now Edmonton, and Central Alberta will follow along behind that, which makes it a little more difficult to find properties because, as Neil said, 600 is entry level now, and it used to be a luxury house. So I'm going to go back to Neil and Rachel and say, how do you manage being able to buy a house that works in the very frothy market that you have in Ontario? How does that work for you?
You want to take this one? Sounds like it's a numbers question.
So sorry, Barry, just to clarify, how do we buy homes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, because homes are so expensive in Ontario and rocketing up and listed low and selling way over list, how are you able to still compete in that market to find houses that work for your tenant buyers? I mean, it's got to be harder for you to buy houses.
Yeah, it certainly was in January, February. I think the market has softened a little bit in the last couple of months, and softened meaning we're not seeing 20 multiple offers. We're seeing 6 or 5, which always, like, it's funny because now when I hear, oh, there's 4 other offers, I'm like, yeah, we have a shot, right? It's kind of like, yes, this is amazing. But a couple of things come into play. So number one, I'm a mortgage professional as well. So I'm qualifying people based on not only what they can afford today, but what they can exit into in the future. So it is really important to understand where they can actually afford to purchase. That's really, really key. So then we go into with our real estate agents, who we've done a lot of training with real estate agents as well. So they understand how our program works. And one of the things that we like to do is look at comparables. What is the house sold for? What is its value in the market today? And if it doesn't, like, for example, we make an offer at that and they come back and say, you got to keep increasing the offer. We don't go much higher because we also have a budget that we've set for our tenant buyers. So if their budget is 700 or 600,000 and we offer 580, and again, 600 is conservative for me. They probably have more room to play, but I like to make sure that I'm giving them lots of wiggle room when they exit out of the program and into their own mortgage. I don't go above the 600 mark if that's the budget I've set for them. So 580, we can ratchet up to 600, but if anything goes above that, we're out. And basically the premise is if that house didn't work out, it wasn't the right house, right? We'll find another one. And we've seen some people look for 2 months maybe, and then they get the house. And then we've seen other people come in and they send in paperwork on Thursday, and Monday we have an accepted offer. So it really just depends right now, but it has definitely softened here, and it's made it a lot easier. And again, like I said, 5 offers you can compete with, 30 you can't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it harkens back to what Andrea said: is you have to know your market, you have to know your numbers, you have to do your math, and you have to be bloody minded about what will work and what won't, and you can't chase it. If you chase it, you put yourself and your investor and your tenant buyer in trouble. So you have to have those numbers nailed down, and if it doesn't work on this one, you move on to the next one. And so now, Neil and Rachel, have you had to move kind of farther afield, farther away from Toronto into smaller areas in order to get some pricing that will work?
I think it's not so much about our pricing, it's really about the home buyer's pricing. One of the really key strategies with rent to owns, whether you're doing tenant first or property first, I think the exit is really key. And that's how we created such a strong success rate. Neil always operated from a place of what is it going to take for them to qualify for a mortgage at the end of the rent to own process, and affordability always keeps coming up. That's the number one priority. So what does their household income and current debt load really support? And if their household income supports a lower price point, well, then they have to be prepared to go further out. They have to be looking for properties that are more entry level than maybe somebody else with less debt and higher household income. So it's not so much about us needing to do it. It's about where, property values, as they go higher, the choices become, slimmer in mainstream markets. Like, you guys are probably familiar with Hamilton, Barrie, main areas like Durham Region, Pickering, Ajax. All of those properties are out of reach for anyone who makes less than $200,000 a year.
Pretty much.
Right. So anyone who has a lower household income is going to have a hard time passing the stress test. And affordability is the number one reason that when we got started with rent owns, that rent owns were failing. Rent owns weren't successfully exiting because home buyers were not able to meet the lender's criteria. So we always start with what is it going to take to exit them out of this deal? Affordability, number one. And if that does require them to look further out, that's where they go. That has been our policy since 2009, when real estate prices were definitely a lot more affordable. We were doing properties in $180,000, $200,000 price point, and people still had to make choices of moving further out based on their affordability.
Yeah, no, that makes it makes perfect sense. It's the tenant buyer's number. It's their number, and then you go where the number leads you. It's as straightforward as that. All right. Well, I haven't been watching the chat to see if there's any questions that we should be answering. Wayne, is there anything you want to pop up for us?
Yeah, you betcha.
Okay. Leo says, do you notice more requests for RTO, a market increase, in the last 2 years? Well, I don't know if we've noticed that in Alberta very much, but maybe.
Maybe in the last 2 months.
Yeah, I don't know that there's been a great, Neil and Rachel are getting how many calls a week? Did you say 80 to 100 calls a week?
Yeah, it's definitely increased here in Ontario. I mean, again, the banks have made it, and the government's made it a lot harder to qualify for mortgages. And even with their federal budget that they released, talking about how it's going to make home ownership easier, it's not, because on the flip side, they're raising interest rates, which changes affordability, right? So it's just going to push people further and further away. So yeah, we've seen an increase, absolutely. We've also seen an increase in people believing this to be more legitimate, right? It used to be that people would call and say, shh, I don't want anybody to know I'm looking at rent to own. And now it's like, I don't really care. It's the only way I'm getting into the market, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely become a lot more legitimate. And certainly a lot of people are looking at it as an option.
Well, and I think we all have, all of you folks and the people we work with, I think we've had some influence on the rehabilitation of rent to own from I would never do a rent to own and nobody wants to talk about it too. It's a legitimate strategy. So I think we're happy about that.
Yeah.
Barbara says, can you please share an example of how RTO can work for properties that have decreased in value? How successful is the property first approach? Barbara, that's a big old question that will take a ton of stuff to answer. Don't know how we can do that in a couple of minutes. Does anybody have
Sign up for the Rapid Cash program?
Yes.
May 7th through 8th.
Yes, Barbara, that is true. I mean, we spend a long time at Rapid Cash talking about rent to own, both strategies, tougher market and an active market. So I'm sorry we can't do justice to your question here today. What else? Hi, I'm from Saskatoon. Curious about the TB's tenant buyer's down payment going to the investor. Can someone explain how that is structured? Thanks in advance. So the option money, the down payment money that any tenant buyer pays upfront usually, and then very often pays more of that on a monthly basis. Our friend from Saskatoon wants to know about how that goes to the investor. How does that work? Neil, tell us about that.
Which Neil?
Which Neil? Well, we'll give it to Taniguchi because
there are no rules, and we have watched, and I know every time you run the course, I'm sure, Barry, you're checking for updates. There's nothing that says specifically that any of those credits have to go into a trust account. So they go straight into the investor's bank account is the easiest way to put it. They become part of cash flow. You're taking part of your future price to the tenant. You're taking that in as you go. And in the case of if you have a joint venture investor involved, you can then sometimes use that money, depending on what your arrangement with them is, to reduce their initial down payment. So if you have a $400,000 property and you get 15 grand from a tenant buyer and your investor put down 20%, which is 80,000, if you pass that full 15 on to them, then they only have 65,000 in that property, which again increases ROI.
And the reason, Facebook user from Saskatoon, the reason it works like that is because the tenant buyer has purchased an option to buy that property. And so they paid you for it. It's your money. And if they do in fact close at the end of the deal, you credit them. They get full credit for the money they paid. If they don't close, it's still your money. So that's how the tenant buyer down payment / option money works. Deb Kennedy. I chatted with a dozen different mortgage brokers, 6 of them. 8 of them flat out said they can't get tenant buyers qualified or they won't waste their time on RTO. Is it just about finding the right brokers, or is there real resistance from lenders these days? Well, Neil, you're getting people qualified. Is there a different attitude? Neil Oliver, sorry. Is there a different attitude in Ontario? Is it because you're a mortgage professional? How tough is it to qualify your RTO tenant buyers?
I don't think this is going to be a fair answer, especially when we're talking about Alberta versus Ontario. But when you go to the bank and you show that you're buying it for $150,000 under market value, the bank's risk is next to nil, right? So we've had no problem, especially in the last couple of years. Scotiabank, for one, is a bank that has had no issues qualifying our RTO people. And it's usually as a result of, keep in mind, we do work with our tenant buyers. We improve their credit. We ensure that they're on a program to pay down any debt that they might have. Much of the time, it's car payments, which banks are looking at a little differently these days, or at least in the last little while. But on top of that, the program is specifically getting them to 10% down, which is 5% more than what the banks would be looking for with good credit. But certainly the equity is a really big player right now. I do think that we're going to see that sort of stance by the banks change a little bit as the government starts to push rent-to-owns forward. They're not going to have much of a choice but to start to qualify people for rent-to-own, from rent-to-own into a mortgage once the government sort of says, listen, we're backing rent-to-own, which is already starting to happen.
Yeah, it's just to add to that, the challenge is that CMHC has been resistant to RTO exits to begin with. And then there's another layer of complexity because most lenders, such as the banks or the people who work at those banks, don't understand rent to own. And because there's a lack of understanding, there's obviously resistance and confusion. So one of the things that's really important is, again, starting with the end in mind. Who is going to be working with these people to exit them? And you almost have to have that connection or that person locked in at the beginning versus trying to figure out who is going to place that mortgage when they're 3 months out 3 months before their RTO option to purchase is supposed to be exercised. That's too late. That's going to cause exactly the bumpiness you just explained here, Deb.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly not a situation where any lender in any bank branch or any mortgage broker either knows about or is comfortable with or even likes rent to own. So you gotta get on the hunt for someone who will work with you. I agree. They got to work with you from the beginning, and they are harder to find, but I do believe that there are lenders out there who will take a properly run RTO program where they can see all the components, when they can see all the paperwork, when they can see all the payments, when they can see the coaching, when they can see the issues as defined at the beginning of a rent to own, and they can see as you move through it how the issues are being solved. I mean, I do believe that there are lenders who will step up. They're just not on every street corner. It's one of the reasons that not everybody does this is because there are these kinds of things that you have to overcome, but you can certainly overcome. So, final words. Let's go to Andrea for some final words on your end. Andrea, you've heard a lot of stuff. What do you want people to take away?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to get educated on the strategy so that you know how to implement it. So please make sure that you get the information that you need so that you can be successful with this strategy.
Okay, Wayne?
I guess I'll just kind of piggyback off of what we were talking about a minute ago about, having trouble finding tenant buyers that can get qualified. Don't get discouraged when you get started and you build up the successful website and people are contacting you and they're interested, but they don't work out. Because I'm sure, I don't know what your conversion rate is on your 80, applicants per week or month or whatever it was, but I'm sure only a small fraction of them are actually suitable for your program. And I think a lot of tenant buyers, they think, why rent when I can own? So why should I pay $2,000 a month in rent when a portion of that can go towards my equity? That's not really how it works. And not every applicant you're going to get is going to be suitable for your program, right? I think that some people just really don't understand it. So make sure you got good education for your tenant buyers in your marketing, and just be patient, I would say.
Patient. Neil Taniguchi.
Again, to take what's been said and add on to that. Yeah, that's a great point that says, I don't know if we always talk about the fact that it's not a straight through pipeline of 100 applicants for rent to own leads to 100 rent to own house deals done. There's probably a reason they call him Mr. No, because you want to make sure you're definitely creating that success for people. And to go back to what Andrea says, the best way to learn and figure out how to implement these, because this strategy, folks, is a game changer. It can make a huge difference in your world, but also in your tenant buyer's world. So that is truly win-win. And to really, really get started in this and get your teeth into it, see you May 7th. There's no other way to put it. Come to the course. Put that investment in yourself and see what it realizes for you. Everyone who's on this call today has seen what the capabilities and possibilities are with this program.
Well, Neil and Rachel, you guys are the farthest away, so we're going to leave the last word to you.
Ooh, I like this. No pressure. No pressure.
No.
I think that we collectively are all very successful. And I think we all agree that we started with some form of education, some credible education. And that, I think, is a starting point for anyone who wants to be successful in any type of real estate investing, especially rent to owns, because it is an advanced strategy. But on top of that, let's layer the network part. Once you take education, like the Rapid Cash program in May, you're also accessing so much more than just the education. You're accessing templates, checklists, and knowledge from a lot of smart people, not just the people that are in the course with you, but also people that have taken the course and are affiliated with Barry's and Donna's network. And then, once you have kind of the peace of mind of the education and the network, well, guess what? You're going to need a system. This is a numbers game. We've talked about it. Not every person you're going to talk to is going to move forward, but you need to systemize things. And again, back to education, that's where you learn those systems. So it all starts with training, education, so that you can be empowered to do that one damn deal, as Barry would say.
Right. And I just want to add that due diligence is really, really important. Make sure you're qualifying people so that they can actually afford what you're putting them into, right? That's how you avoid any legal anything, right? You've done the due diligence to ensure that the people can actually afford to live in the house that they're wanting to purchase from a tenant perspective first, right? And number two, do it from the win-win. I think Neil just said that, right? It's got to be win-win. If you're doing it from that perspective, this will be a massively successful thing for anyone to take on.
Yeah, win-win just draws this whole thing along. If you have the other person's interests at heart, your own interests will follow along, and you'll do so well. So that's a great way to wrap this up. So Neil and Rachel, Wayne and Andrea, I always so appreciate it when you guys come on and just let everybody hear about your experiences and what you think about creative strategies. To my mind, if folks are listening and wondering whether they should do something, well, if this sort of thing is not what's turning your crank, I don't know what will be. This is a great group. Education's key. Show up on May 7th and 8th, and we'd love to see you. So thanks, everybody, and we'll say good night. Thanks for showing up. Good night, everybody. It is like somebody's taking the blinders off you. This rapid cash program is something more than just you show up on a couple of days over a weekend. This program is good even for people who are just starting out, people who just want to take advantage of some opportunities that have come up other than long-term buy and hold. Strategies that we're going to talk about, it's applicable in all markets all across the country. We'll be surrounded by like-minded people. It's an incredibly supportive community. When we say rapid cash, we mean get money not in years and years, but in potentially months. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to get started.